Our opening song is going to be number 547, Be Thou My Vision. So please stand.
Let's begin with a word of prayer, if you would kneel with me. Father in heaven, Lord, my prayer is that the name of Jesus would be honored and glorified. That, in the words of John the Baptist, that he may increase and I may decrease. That his light may shine and be seen clearly. And I pray that this blessing would be on each one here. In Jesus' name, amen. So I want to share with you a bit of my testimony. And so I guess I want to start with a testimony about my testimony. So the testimony of my testimony is that in November 2014, so this November will be maybe 2 years ago. So almost 2 years ago, I was at a meeting with other educators in Florida, and I was scheduled to do, the morning worship for our group on Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday, and so a friend of mine had the morning worship on the Monday, and so I already had everything I was going to do all planned out. And I went to his worship, and he was sharing some stories from a friend of mine who had written a book. I don't know if you know him. His name is Don McClafferty, and he had a ministry about ministering to little children and teaching little children to really know Jesus. So anyhow, these stories that he was sharing were from Don McClafferty's book. And all the time he's sharing these stories, the Lord is really impressing me that you have all kinds of stories like that, but you never share your stories with anybody. And so there was a sense of guilt that was growing larger and larger. Like the Lord's done all kinds of things for you, but you're like the fig tree that Jesus cursed, full of leaves but no fruit. How come all this stuff happens, but you never really tell anybody, about the great things that God has done for you? And so, I decided that, I should share some of the stories of things that have happened at Heritage from my worship, which I did. And, everybody was very excited about it. And, that was when the Lord really convicted me that I should be writing this in a book. So, from that point, I started writing. And then November a year ago, November 29th, I had not finished that book. In fact, I had not been particularly focused on it, and there's so many other things in life that you can do, and was focused on all that stuff. And so November 29th, I'm having, and this is during the Thanksgiving break, I'm having real problems with my stomach. And so, if you total all the times I've ever thrown up in my life, up to that point, it was like 6. I just have not ever thrown up very much. And so, I kept disappearing. We had a bunch of people over, and Thanksgiving kind of stuff, And I kept disappearing into the bathroom and, throwing up more. And so, by the middle of the day, I was convinced that what I really needed was Pepto-Bismol. Really frustrated that we didn't have any, And so my wife comes into the bathroom to see me, kind of in agony, and, what's the matter? And I've just, I've got such a sick stomach. I've just got so much pressure, if I could just, get something for my stomach, I would be fine, And she asked me to describe all my symptoms, and she's like, well, I think we should go to the hospital. I'm like, I don't need to go to the hospital. What I need is a bottle of Pepto-Bismol. Why don't you call up these people around campus and see if they have one? And she's like, no, we probably should just go to the hospital just in case. And I'm like, you are all wrong. All I need is some Pepto-Bismol and I will be fine. So on the way to the hospital, she says, do you know what I think's going on here? And I'm like, no, what? I think you're having a heart attack. And I'm like, I think you're completely wrong, and you'll see when we get to the hospital. All I need is Pepto-Bismol. So, I get to the emergency room, you know how you go and you sit in a chair in the waiting room? I'm in that chair for less than 30 seconds, and they're pulling me into the back and, strapping me down and hooking me up to all kinds of things. And, the next thing, they're telling me, yeah, you're having a heart attack right now. I'm like, man, I can't believe this. So, anyhow, they didn't have the capacity to deal with my situation at that hospital, so I had to be transferred to a hospital in Knoxville. And so there's this very awkward moment where, they're going to load me into an ambulance, but before they do that, they want me to spend a little bit of time with my wife. And, it suddenly comes to me in a flood, like this moment is in case you have any last words you want to say, and you die on the way over there, or you die in the hospital. And so I'm thinking, oh man, what am I going to say? Of course, there's, the normal stuff you would say, like, oh, honey, I love you and all this stuff, right? And then all of a sudden, it comes to me, that whole thing from last November, that you were supposed to write this book, you were supposed to give your testimony, and you don't have that done. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So, like, if I really die right now, then the next moment, is to face Jesus. And I'm like, wow, I'm really sorry I never did that book. That just, I'm like, no, I have to solve this. I have to figure this out. So, I'm telling my wife, okay, here are my passwords to my different accounts, and these are where these things are on my computer, and I need you to get this printed for me. And then, this is terrible. She says to me, oh, no, I'm not. And I'm like, what do you mean you're not? And she's like, no, if you want to get this published, you have to stay alive and do it yourself. So, now I think that was her way of positively encouraging me, but anyhow, I felt like I was in a real quandary. So following that November, I worked hard to get this book done, right? Except it's not done, which is why this is so awkward. I wish I could just pass out the book to you, right? But the fact is, I've written it, but it isn't published, and I've had trouble getting it published. But I want to take time with you this week to try and share some stories from this book that I did write. And, they are, in essence, the first angel's message is fear God and give glory to him. And the whole concept of this book is Jesus talking about the mustard seed. And he says, think about the mustard seed. It is the smallest of all seeds, but it produces this great plant which actually becomes a tree. And, Jesus teaches that's what faith is like. Faith is something that is very little, and it causes very big things to happen. Jesus said, look, if you have the faith of the grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, go and cast yourself into the sea, and it will happen. And so, I want to share with you, and the name of the book is Mustard Seeds, is some of my mustard seed experiences. First of all, just the fact that I myself am, in essence, a mustard seed. I was reminded of that the other day. We had rec the other night, and I went onto the basketball court, and I thought, hey, I'll play with the guys, right? Yeah, they saw my performance and did not invite me to play. It was so pathetic. Anyhow, that's what I was as a child. I would come to the basketball court in the park, and I would bring my ball, and then a bunch of guys would show up, and they would say, hey, great, let's play ball, and then they would choose sides. And, when they get done choosing, I'm like, hey, what about me? And they're like, oh, you play substitute. And I'm like, okay, how do I do that? Will you just stand here at the side, and when we need you, we'll call you. And I would stand there until the game was over, and they would give me the ball back. I just, I was not the kid that you would choose to be on your team. When I was in Little League, I would stand, with the bat in my hand at home plate, and people would try to say positive, encouraging things, and so if the ball whizzes by me and the umpire calls a ball, then people would say, good eye, try to encourage me. Very rarely did I swing the bat and find the ball. So there was just not a lot to draw people to me. In PE, in the winter, my PE teacher would put together a dance thing, where people do square dances and stuff. And I was always partnered with Kathy. And Kathy, I haven't even described her yet, you could already tell. Kathy's hair was, well, it seemed like it had never been brushed or even washed. Okay, and she had a scent around her that, people found quite repulsive. And it wasn't any kind of a perfume. And she seemed to have no friends, and year after year, they always thought that she was the perfect match for me. And my teachers found me annoying. On the very first day of kindergarten, I was put in timeout. And that was because they had this thing, a nap time, and for nap time, you had like this little, mat that you got from your mom. And so my mom made me this nice little mat. And nap time came, and for me, that mat was like a magic carpet, and so I'm just zooming around all over the room and visit with this person over here, and then I scoot my mat over there, and next thing I knew, me and my magic carpet were out in the hall. It did not go particularly well, and there were many days where I just spent my time in the hall. So this was like my pattern for elementary school. My desk was often like right next to the teacher's desk. Sometimes it was in the back of the class, facing the back wall in the corner. Sometimes it was like all the way at the front at the chalkboard, sometimes they'd put a circle on the chalkboard and I had to put my nose up into the circle. That was my life. There were some things at home that made it that way. The conversation went like this between my parents. If you're going to have this child, you will have to raise it by yourself. My mom was 42 years old. It was kind of late in life to have a child. And my dad did not want that. And the reason for that was because I had a brother that was born a number of years before me. And when he was 4 years old, he died in a terribly gruesome way. His head was torn off by a truck in front of the house. And so my parents were really traumatized by that. And so they really just couldn't, at least my dad couldn't. So anyhow, my mom chose to have me anyhow. The relationship with my dad was not good. Sometimes he would not speak to me for months. And there were beatings and, all kinds of difficult things. But, the net result was that socially, I didn't have a whole lot of social skills. It was difficult for me to make friends. And so, in essence, I was a mustard seed. I was in society the smallest person, not welcome and, almost friendless. Truly a non-entity. Nevertheless, Jesus was kind to me and compassionate, and pulled me out of what I was. Some years ago, I was at a museum with my son David in Fort Worth, and they had like this collection of Picassos there. And I don't know if you've ever seen a Picasso, but everything in a Picasso is wrong. It's like portraits of people, but nothing is where it belongs. The ear would be down by the knee. The arm is coming off of the waist. I mean, everything in a Picasso is weird. And so my son was looking at the Picasso, and he's getting closer and closer to it, and there's not like a rope that has it fenced off, and so he's reaching his hand forward like this. The finger is getting closer and closer, and suddenly the security guard has hold of his hand and him and is pulling him away to prevent his personal encounter with Picasso. And of course, the reason, that little painting is worth millions of dollars. And, in a certain sense, that little painting kind of represents us in that we may have everything messed up in our lives. And certainly as a child, everything about me was messed up. Nevertheless, like that security guard, protecting that painting, Jesus sees us not just worth millions, but worth his own life. And Jesus also constantly watches over us and sees in us such great value that he gave himself for us. So, although, certainly you haven't had challenges in your life like I have, but, nevertheless, you might have had struggles that make you feel like, nobody cares about you, or, you're worthless. And, that's the first point that I want to make with you, is that, no, Jesus sees you like that painting, that your value is infinite, worth his own life. And he gave himself for you, and he gave himself for me. And he's poured out just unmeasured grace on my life and transformed me in so many ways. And I just want to encourage you that Jesus sees you the same way. There's no amount of bad that you do or problems that you have that diminish your value to him. So even though you might look like a Picasso, everything about you could be messed up. Nevertheless, Jesus sees that infinite value. Let's kneel and have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, I want to thank you for the eyes of Jesus that see us totally different than the way we see ourselves. He sees us as a pearl of great price, as a treasure buried in a field, worthy that he would give himself, even if it was only one of us that would be saved. I thank you for that love, and I pray that as we worship you this week, that love, that commitment that Jesus has to us would be made clear, would be made obvious, and that his name would be glorified. And pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, ladies, let's dismiss you first. You need to stay. Oh. Okay, guys. I have a little bag here.